Howdy, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show.
And I'm Brian, and today we've got an awesome video for you guys. I'm really excited to talk about this lineup of maples that we have here. These are some of those classics that I think everybody's going to be familiar with, and the ones that kind of set the staple for a lot of Japanese maples in your garden.
Oh, for sure. Now, we have a heavily requested video today. Today we're going to be talking about some of the most heat-tolerant Japanese maples. So we're going to be talking about some of our favorites. These are a few classics, but we've picked out just 5 for this video of some high heat, high humidity Japanese maples that'll do great for you. Now, Japanese maples work zones 5 through 9, so remember that they're going to need protection for that hot afternoon sun, especially in zone 9. A lot of Japanese maples are going to need a lot more shade in zone 9 than they would in other zones. Now, not all zones are the same. We often talk about this in some of our other videos. You know, every zone 9 isn't created equally. Zones are actually rated on how cold you get and not how hot you get. So your heat index could also be a factor. Zone 9 on the East Coast might not quite give you the same effects as zone 9 in California. California kind of breaks a lot of the rules, because you'll have areas that don't get too hot or too cold. So keep that in mind with this, but these are some exceptional high heat Japanese maples. One of the reasons we like using that zone comparison too is it makes a really good example for the East Coast. Typically, if it's past zone 9 on the East Coast, you know, really not going to work for you.
Right,
so,
yeah.
But these are some of our favorite zone 8, zone 9 plants, and most of these are going to work in full sun in zone 8 too. So.
Yeah, so if you guys are enjoying these videos, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Every single day we do a video. I think every day since I've been here, we've been doing a video. So there's just tons and tons of maple content and all kinds of other plants on there as well. So we greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. And I think today is going to be another example of how you can assess your climate and where you're at and what maples are going to work best for you. Yep. Today we're talking about those really high heat areas. So
we brought in the Okie for the high heat one today. We've got the guy, he's got the high heat experience here.
That's
he knows all about it. People are like, North Carolina, what do they know about high heat? Well, we got Brian with us today backing us up on these. We definitely sell to all over the United States.
Yeah.
So we do check on these things. We certainly study this all over the world. And it's something we like to pay close attention to when we're shipping to Dallas, when we're putting trees in Louisiana and Alabama, and some areas that are definitely going to have a little bit higher picked up heat. One of our main markets we used to sell a lot to was Columbia, South Carolina. And so this is kind of some of the mix we would take when we would get down there to Columbia, South Carolina. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. Now, our first one here on the table is one you know. It's a classic Japanese maple. It was in our Red Maple Nurseries videos. That is Emperor 1. Now, this is the exact same plant as Red Emperor, so if you see Emperor 1, Red Emperor, the two are synonymous, but Emperor 1 is the correct name. This is a very heat-tolerant upright red. Typically, Emperor 1 exceeds Bloodgood to 15 feet. Bloodgood tends to go past that a little bit faster, but Emperor 1 tends to grow over a foot to sometimes 1.5 feet of growth a year, and it tends to be one of our highest performing trees in high heat environments.
this is one that I grew in Oklahoma, and you know, Oklahoma climate is kind of that extreme of all of those things. Mm-hmm. You get the extreme colds in the winter, and then the really high heat summers. And this one performed so well for me. I was always impressed with how vigorous it was as well. It's a strong grower, and holding that red color throughout the summer was another great thing about it. And you know, it's just one of those plants that you don't have to worry as much if you want to plant it out in a real sunny spot. You know, that's something that, especially if you've got a lot of other things that you're concerned about, can also kind of eventually become somewhat of a shade tree for other things. So you can use that in a lot of ways in a sunny location. Oh, for sure. Now this one's going to go from being a very bold red. It holds that color very well. We're actually shooting this video in August of 2022. So if you see these sizes are indicative of what we have around August of 2022. If you're watching this at a later time, our size might be slightly larger, slightly smaller, but an excellent grower and an excellent one at holding that color. So it starts out that dark maroon, kind of a picked up red, and then holds that very well throughout the spring and summer. Right before fall color, any Japanese maples can get a little bit of green in them. I have people say, what never gets green? And the truth is, any Japanese maples can get a little bit of green in them right before the fall color. Emperor 1 hits you with that fire engine red fall color though. It's a classic red. And because of its heat tolerance, it normally has a really good fall color. I mean, normally have a lot of leaf burn, so the foliage is there. It's looking excellent. I've had people plant this one in some very high heat areas with great success. So, you know, we quote this one up to zone 8B, even for sun tolerance. Here on the East Coast for sure. Again, people in California might get by with this in full sun in zone 10, but they might not have the heat index. Excellent tree though for vigor of growth, for durability,
holds its foliage really well in humid climates. Now, that said, there are some factors you want to take into consideration if you're in a very high heat zone. A lot of our very high heat zones may get some salt spray. Japanese maples don't like a lot of salt spray, so you will have to protect them from a coastal climate where they're getting salt spray. But I've seen this one doing excellent in Charleston, South Carolina, and just really, performing excellently in high heat, humid climates where you don't really think about growing Japanese maples sometimes.
Yeah. And one of the unique characteristics, and I know we're talking about this in the high heat situation, but a lot of those extreme climates can have both hot and cold situations. This one leafs out a little bit later, and so you kind of less risk on that frost or something like that in your late spring frost. That was something we had a lot in Oklahoma, so I was always glad
the best
to have
of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. So you get that heat tolerance and you get that later leaf out, so it's kind of a bonus on that particular plant for a lot of different climates.
I find it to be super durable. I mean, when I'm recommending a Japanese maple and somebody says, hey, I'd like an upright red, I talk to them about where they're at, and they're like, hey, I'm in Dallas. I'm like, hey, you should really consider Emperor One.
Yeah.
It's a great choice for that. I think it's going to outperform Bloodgood for you. Bloodgood's a great plant, but I think it's going to outperform it for you in your high heat zones. And that's really what this video is about, kind of give you some suggestions for things that may outperform other plants if you are in some of those hotter zones. So next up here on the table, we have Acer palmatum Kiyohime.
Kiyohime, I mean, this is a great dwarf variety that's just going to be able to handle just about anything you can throw at it. I mean, just a tough, bulletproof plant, and great color on this too. This is something you kind of get that amazing spring display, and then once that summer heats up, you don't have anything to worry about. This thing's just going to keep kicking and shooting that new growth off. It's just an amazing display of color throughout the year, I think.
Yeah, one of the reasons we put Kiyohime on this list was Dr. Bill Shell down there in Auburn, Alabama. He has some beautiful specimens of this. We had Ken Rogers on earlier this year, and he was talking about some of his Kiyohimes, and they just have some amazing specimens. And you can see them just thriving there in that heat, that Auburn, Alabama area, and really outperforming some other plants. I mean, it's one that's done exceptionally well in high heat areas. Now, this one's a very dense one, and like Brian was saying, it's exceptionally durable. So we actually have a little overlap here with some of our Japanese maples for bonsai. The durability pays off here also for the heat. This one's an excellent candidate for container gardening. You can put this on a big pot or container. Now, be cautious of that in the heat. When I say in the container, definitely in the shade for the container in a high heat environment. Oftentimes people will talk to us about growing a Japanese maple for full sun, but they haven't specified whether they're going in the ground or in the container. Now, Kiyohime is a great one to point out that in the ground, they're going to be much more sun tolerant than in the container. There's a lot of other factors, water retention, how much the pot's heating up. So there's a lot of other things to factor in there. So if you were going full sun on this tree here in Western North Carolina, it probably isn't going to skip a beat. But if you have it next to a pool where it's getting a lot of reflective light and a black pot, you maybe notice some more heat damage. So there are some factors to be considering there for that. But Kiyohime is one of the very best for being exceptionally heat tolerant and growing those humid climates. It's one you can get out there up to zone 8B in full sun. It's going to thrive for you. It's going to do excellent. It's going to perform and give you lots of colors. Very distinctly different shape than something like the Emperor One. So it's going to be one that thrives for you. I mean, it's kind of the gold standard for a compact dwarf that's very heat tolerant.
This is just a great plant for just about every season. My favorite though is that spring flush. I mean, it's just outrageous, just the color that comes across this thing. And its form, it's just a great dwarf for any kind of, especially for container gardening. I think that's a great idea of just having this in a container. It just fills that space out real nicely and you get year-round interest on it.
Hey, stop me if you've heard about this one before. Acer palmatum Tamukiyama. Excellent heat tolerant lace leaf. You definitely know this one. It's a classic for a reason. One of the most heat tolerant red lace leaves you can think of. One of the reasons we include it in this video is because, definitely when people are first getting into Japanese maples, some of these other ones may be a little bit more exotic than their taste right away. People normally get in through something like Tamukiyama or Bloodgood, and that's why that Emperor One and that Tamukiyama are great examples for people. This is going to go out and perform, way better in a high heat environment than something like Crimson Queen. Excellent tree, but Tamukiyama is going to outperform it in the deep south especially. Very vigorous tree, typically about 6 by 6 in 15 years, but exceptionally heat tolerant and your quintessential red lace leaf for high heat areas, I think.
For sure, I completely agree with that. Growing this in Oklahoma, this was one that I could feel confident about putting it out in full sun. I had several of these actually throughout my garden just because I knew I needed that splash of red, and I was looking for that kind of traditional lace leaf weeping Japanese maple, and this is definitely one that, you know, everybody kind of is drawn to, especially in beginning of collecting or getting into Japanese maples, is what you typically would see planted out in a garden there.
We got to do something really cool a couple years ago. Tim and I got to go to Kobayashi Miji-in, and they're like a 29 generation nursery there in Japan, and they actually named Tamukiyama, so it was crazy to go to the place. It's still the same location where physically Tamukiyama was named. It's pretty crazy. We actually have these in a good bit of shade right now here at our nursery. We have to worry about watering thousands and thousands of plants, so we do have them in a little bit more shade than you would in your natural landscape. This is one that holds its color best of one of the red lace leaves. So if you have this one out in the ground, you're typically gonna have better color. Again, we're in August and heavy shade with these right now, so they do tend to get a little bit greener for us. And like I said, anything can green up before that fall color. Excellent scarlet red fall color on this one, but it tends to be one of the premium Japanese maples for holding that red throughout the spring and summer very, very well. You know, more of a low cascading umbrella shape, and just an excellent one. Another good candidate for container gardening for high heat areas. Again, be conscious of how hot the pot gets, but an excellent candidate for a Japanese maple for a very high heat area.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, next up on the table here, we've got an amazing cultivar. We have Acer palmatum Shishi.
Yeah, we couldn't go through our heat tolerant ones without talking about this one. Another classic older Japanese maples on the 1700s list. One of the reasons we put this on the list, I have family in Columbia, South Carolina, and I mean, they planted this sucker in red dirt clay up against a brick house. I mean, it's touching the brick almost. And in Columbia, South Carolina, if you know anything about the South, that area is hot. It can reach heats far exceeding, you know, Central Texas. Like it's a high heat area with a lot of humidity. Didn't skip a beat. I mean, it's a gorgeous plant, exceptionally heat tolerant. It's another one we had on that bonsai list for its durability. Shishi, often referred to as the lion's head. So if you see lion's head, same plant. We always point out that it's actually a specific line in a Japanese literature. It's actually the female line, and it has this golden fall color. The fall colors are quite exquisite. It's really kind of where it lights up, but you get excellent kind of oranges with reds and yellow infused into that orange. And it's one that's very consistent for us. So I know a lot of high heat climates, you know, they don't quite get the Western North Carolina fall color we get here now. And this is one for me that even in that heat of Columbia has always had excellent fall color. I've always seen it really be consistent for fall color, and just really thrive in high heat zones too.
Yeah, I think that consistent is the best way to describe that plant for sure. In Oklahoma, that was one that I grew there, had it out in full sun. And what I really was impressed with this was just how heat tolerant it really was. I mean, I never seen any leaf burn on that at all. And it seemed like the more sun you gave it, the more it thrived, the more the new growth that was shooting off of it. And like you said, that color transition from spring to that dark green in the summer, and then that fire engine orange and reds and yellows in the end there, it's just an amazing plant. It continuously is an impressive plant no matter what time of the year it is. Even in once the leaves drop on that amazing structure that it has is just really impressive. And I think you know, if you're in a high heat area, that's definitely one you should consider, because it's going to be something that's going to stand out amongst a lot of other more traditional styles that you would see in a landscape. The Shishi is going to be something somebody's going to say, man, what is that? You know, that is an amazing looking plant.
Yeah, it's a classic. It's kind of funny. The leaves are already curled up, so it's not going to burn. It already has this curled up appearance to it. A lot of people will, you know, stump a master gardener with this one. They'll say, hey, what plant is this? And they're like, it doesn't look like a Japanese maple to me. So if you're not familiar with this one, a lot of people are that are watching our videos, but for people who aren't familiar with Japanese maples, it's often one that gets a lot of questions. People are like, I don't know what this is. So it's got that uniqueness factor going on in the garden, but durability's off the charts on this one. Again, all these we'll actually be talking about here today can go in full sun, especially East Coast, up to zone 8B. So you're talking the very pinnacle of palmatum for that sun tolerance. Now, if you're looking for outside palmatum, check out our Heat Seeker series. We do some cool stuff with Acer olivianum here, but some really, I think, standout heat tolerant Japanese maples here.
Definitely. And you know, last on the table here, I mean, this plant here is just probably in my top rated, you know, for heat tolerance. Acer palmatum Seryu.
Yeah, I often wondered, because the name Seryu means blue-green dragon. So I was often like, hey, it's like chartreuse green because it works so well in the sun.
Right.
That we would often recommend this tree for full sun exposures. And the new growth, certainly in full sun, is a bright chartreuse green. Well, as this tree matures and kind of shades out some of those lower branching, you get that more emeraldy color, or that blue-green dragon going on the lower growth. Probably one of our fastest growing Japanese maples. Also one of our most heat tolerant. This tree grows typically over 1.5 feet of growth a year. I get people all the time, they're like, Japanese maples grow slow. And I'm like, well, hold on, it depends on what you're talking about. You know, we've got Kiyohime here, it's certainly a dwarf, but we've got some things here that may exceed what you're thinking of quite a bit if you're, you know, so it's all about finding the right Japanese maple for what you're looking for. And for that, Seryu is an excellent tree to shade out other Japanese maples. It's an excellent full sun exposure plant up to that zone 8B again, and really fast growing in the heat. I mean, it soaks that heat up and gives it back to you in growth.
I mean, and one of the most special things about that plant is that you have an upright lace leaf, which I think is something just so special, so unique. You know, you always think about the traditional weeping and mounding, cascading lace leaf varieties, but you know, it's really hard to imagine a lace leaf in a upright canopy, you know, and once these mature out, I mean, it's really impressive to see just that feel and texture that it has. Once you get some size on that, it's just really amazing. I remember we'd get a lot of winds come blowing through in Oklahoma, and just the way that thing would move with all of the lace leaves on it, the feel and texture of that was very impressive. And then in the fall, I mean, it kind of goes to this amazing like chocolate burgundy color. I mean, it's really, really cool looking plant. And just that lace leaf upright, I think is very much the most important thing about what this plant can do in a high heat situation.
A lot of people have that misconceived notion about it being a lace leaf that's going to be delicate. It looks delicate and airy. Shoot, it can take the sun. It can really handle high heat exposures. Another one's always popular for deep south for that very reason. We'll have to get out to this garden. The Richards have one of my favorite specimens of this here locally in Flat Rock.
I would love to see that.
I saw them at church the other day, and I was going to go grab them and say, hey, I need to come to your garden, but I didn't quite catch them. I was chasing babies. But one of these days, maybe we can get over there. There's a gorgeous specimen of this locally here. And just an easy Japanese maple to grow. Now, with any of these, the key, even in your high heat zone, is going to be good drainage. You may need to increase that water amounts. I mean, I know you know that from Oklahoma. I think it might be one of the reasons you moved, was all that constant watering.
Well, I mean, you know, it would get so hot there sometimes that the ground would begin to split and crack, you know, just from periods of drought. And, you know, you'd have to make sure you were really paying attention to that watering, especially this time of the year through August through September. I mean, it was really that point where the rain just kind of stopped and you just had to maintain them until you could get into those more wetter months in the winter. But definitely, you know, these are great beginner plants. You know, that when I first started getting into Japanese maples, this is kind of what I started with. You know what I mean? This was kind of that
starter pack.
It is. This is absolutely an amazing starter pack. And these will grow in so many different climate situations and just give you an amazing variety of display of color and texture. I mean, this is kind of why we want to do these videos, you know, to give you guys an example of how many different kind of Japanese maples you can grow in those high heat areas.
So I hope this gives you some good examples. You know, a few factors definitely to consider. We have a video about growing Japanese maples in high heat locations, but just to reiterate a few of those things, you know, reflective light, be conscious of that. If you got a lot of rocks around your tree, if you've got a glass building at your office space and it's reflecting a lot of heat back, these can be factors that can increase the heat on your Japanese maple. Certainly rainfall in your area can be a factor. I mean, I know years where it seems like we were too hot here, but it's really our lack of rainfall, and that can certainly factor into trees being burnt. A lot of times when people think their tree is burning from sun, it's too much water. So that's another thing we catch on that. But these are some of the utmost Japanese maples for high heat climates. If you start out with these and follow the simple rules, I think you'll have some really good success.
Absolutely. We greatly appreciate you guys tuning in today. Remember to sign up for our 10 at 10 email. We do 10 new trees every Tuesday. And we've been putting out some really killer stuff here lately. I mean, absolutely amazing, the variety that we have right now here at the nursery, and we're excited to be able to share that with you. And so the 10 at 10 email is a good way for you guys to keep up with what we have in the works and what we've got every week. We're going to release some new stuff for you. But we hope that you guys enjoyed this lineup we had today. Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.